HD2, and then Spark HD would be the HD3 channel. We don't put number 4 on there. The more you put channels, it sort of compresses the signal a little bit. So
saturates up the whole signal.
Yeah, yeah. So our students start on Spark HD. That's a radio station that is targeting students. So they're able to create content for their own audience and learn that way. Our 4th channel is called Shine Worship, and it's just 24 hours of worship music, and that's only available online.
Oh, so it's more of like something streamed as well.
Yes, it's streamed as well. Yep.
Well, that's quite really informative of you. And just before I get to the general experience and your industry knowledge in this field, I'd just like to ask, because you talked about the digital platforms that your students normally get to. How is it that how does your school manage the transition from mainstream media that has been the case over time in the media field into now the current digital platform that the world is trying so hard to embrace?
Yeah.
In school, how do you normally do it? Because is your curriculum flexible enough for you to integrate these students into this kind of system, or do you just do it on an off-key basis?
Yeah. So there are some curriculums at universities that have minimal changes to it.
Yeah.
Mathematics. Doesn't change a whole lot in mathematics, right? True. You can teach the same class for probably 30 years and not change anything.
Pythagoras is still Pythagoras, yeah.
Right. But when you're talking about a career that is constantly changing, and that being media, your classes and how you teach it has to change as well. The equipment changes. So I go back in some of my classes and I show them heritage equipment. When I started this, we were using reel-to-reel machines, cutting tape with the razor blades and taping them together. That's how we edited. We played records, vinyl records for radio. And then I can list off several technologies through the years that have come and gone that we utilized in radio till we get today, which is all digital based. Everything we have as a system is within a computer today. And so if you do not continually upgrade your skills, especially in the media world, many careers are that way. It's lifelong learning, right? Then you're going to be left behind. And if you continue to think that a radio station, for example, is just an FM signal, you are not going to have a future. You have to realize that that content that you're putting out on FM has to be delivered on different platforms, okay?
Yeah.
The thing I've mentioned this week in classes, that content is always king, right? Content is king. Get great, compelling content produced professionally, and you will capture an audience's attention with that. They now, within the last 10 years, say distribution is queen. So how we distribute that content is changing. And in many ways, we're seeing media kind of diverge on itself. In the radio world, which is primarily the audio world, the number one job hired at radio stations today in the United States are video editors. Yeah. We now have cameras in our radio studio and a video switcher so that we can capture content on video and then repurpose that. So that content, we're sharing audio, but we're capturing video, and then we're allowed to take that video and turn that into reels for Instagram, TikTok, and then utilize it in different ways.
So, according in your general experience and the industry knowledge, what are the biggest differences and similarities of running a radio station? Because background knowledge about you is that you're a missionary, right? Which means that you've been able to carry out a couple of team building exercises and coming up with various stations in African regions, sub-Saharan regions, in South American region, and even in America itself.
Yes.
Which means that you've understood and you've seen the disparities and similarities in different regions. So what's the biggest difference between the African region and your place, America itself, and of course South America? And what challenges did you come up with? Did you come across when you were actually coming up with this radio station?
Yeah. So when it comes to radio stations, the church in South America, for example, I was running a production center.
Yeah.
We were producing content. When someone would come up and say, hey, we have an opportunity to buy a radio station, I would ask them, have you put together a funding model, a budget for the year? You got to have a plan. Radio, it's a lot of money to pull off a radio station and do it with quality. I mean, you can put on a radio station and not invest much in the content, and it's not going to go anywhere. If you want it to go anywhere, you've got to invest in that content, and so you've got to work at it. So I would talk to them about, what are you trying to do with a radio station? What is your goal? What is the why behind it? A good example is, I had a district in the capital of Bolivia, La Paz, Bolivia, that had a radio station offered to them to purchase. It was an AM radio station, and I believe the purchase price was $45,000, okay, which is not much. It's not much for a radio station.
Not much.
Okay, and so they got the equipment. I asked them to give me an equipment list. Subpar equipment, they're going to have to replace it. They didn't have a budget for the first year. Who's going to staff this? Are they volunteers? Are you paying their salaries? And how are you going to fund it? Well, they did a campaign where they said at their large church gatherings, if you sell 1 sheep or 3 chickens and donate that money, if every member of their district did that, they could buy this radio station. And I cautioned against buying that radio station, because they could have spent $5,000 and bought a weekly time slot on the most listened to youth radio station in that city, and done a program professionally to that target audience of youth, and they would have had much more of an impact investing $5,000 versus buying a radio station for $45,000. So the differences, and I'll use South America as an example of deficiencies or differences, challenges. A lot of the Christian radio stations in South America had problems. One of the big problems is that they used the language of the church. Dear brothers and sisters, can God strengthen you and give you they talked like preachers, right? Preachers, and the structure of a sermon, that's made for the church. Radio is different. So I don't even like it when they take a sermon and put it on the radio. Radio is the most intimate medium. When you're in church and you're a pastor, you're talking to a group of people. Welcome everyone.
Yeah.
No, radio, welcome friend. I'm glad you're here. It's personal, right? So if you want to create a radio ministry for the church, create something that's completely separate from the sermon. You can take the same material from that sermon, just deliver it and package it in a different way. So language of the church was one of it. Just the level of professionalism was not where it needed to be. If you listen to, mainstream secular radio, it sounded twice as better than Christian radio, because they weren't investing in the content product. And the reason why we are successful in the U.S., the United States radio industry, the number one format right now that is growing faster than any other is Christian music. Mm-hmm. And that's because we've invested in the content that is being on that radio station beyond the music, what we say between the songs. We care about the listener. We target and focus our content to appeal to that listener. And bottom line, we ask the why. Why are we doing this? It's for the listener. Make them the star, not us. It's not about us. It's about the listener. And so when it comes to Africa, again, just my experience I have in different countries, again, it's sort of the same issues as South America. In the language of the church, if it's a Christian program, they speak Christianese, right? It's the Christian language. It's the language to speak in the church or with your brothers and sisters from church. That's not the way the world is. So a good example, a good friend of mine who was a president of a university in Brazil. Mm-hmm. He came to Cape Verde, and he's in the churches in Cape Verde, our churches, mm-hmm. and they're singing hymns in French inside the church. And he said, why are we singing hymns in French inside the church when in the street I hear upbeat songs that are in Cape Verdean Creole?
Yeah, Creole.
That's the music of the street. Why can't we create music like that for the church? Right? We have to understand the culture we're in and how do we best reach them, effectively reach them using media technology. So level of professionalism, and that comes through investing more in creating that content, learning, never stop learning. Okay, I've done this many, many years. I still have a coach every week that sits down with me and my co-host and coaches us. Listen to our show, says, oh, this is good. Here, try this, make this better this way. And so we're constantly improving how we do this to make it more effective. So there's slight differences, but there are solutions to those deficiencies, if you will.
Thank you so much for that. And just before we get to our audience engagement, just one last question. In radio and also in podcasting, if I may now introduce that as well.
Yes.
How do you balance the creative aspects of programming that with the business needs of the station or of the podcast that you're coming up with?
Yeah.
Because you've talked about relatability and you've talked about how you can integrate what you are actually seeking to put out across with the needs of the people who are listening to you. So how do you do that, and as well as maintain your audience and increase your audience? Because we know how versatile audience can be, and especially in the current new era of social media, where the attention span is very, very limited. People get bored easily. So how do you manage understanding the content you're supposed to bring about and the needs of that radio station program or the needs of that podcast that you are actually running? You can just briefly tell us how it is, and we listen to what our audience has to ask.
So I think what we're forgetting is that any media content that we're distributing, whether it be a radio station or a podcast, it's a product. In order to garner listeners, you have to have a quality product. So when it comes to creativity, yes, you definitely want to be creative. Radio is different from podcast in many different ways. It's just sort of like a radio station is like a big mega church, okay? Consider it a big mega church. It's got a big audience. A podcast, when podcasts started, there were no rules. It was like, do anything because there were no rules. Now that we've gotten in 15 years of doing podcasts, we now have research. We now have to do them more professionally. So podcasts would be like the small group of the big church, right?
The teens church or something of that sort.
So the big church has a sermon which is for everyone. Podcasts are small groups, and small groups are more focused on that small group. So successful podcasts really focus what they're doing. The term mass media. This is micro media. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get a micro audience, because there are podcasts, some that have millions of listeners, right? Typically, the ones that have millions of listeners are celebrity-driven, so it's already a celebrity with a built-in audience. It's someone who storytelling is paramount to the success of it. Murder mystery type podcasts are very popular genre that garner attention. That's pure entertainment, though, right? But if we focus our audience, the audience, and then market the podcast to that audience is also going to find they share like-mindedness between their friends. So they're going to share, hey, have you heard this podcast yet? In fact, my son texted me today, have you heard this new podcast? And I hadn't yet. So that's how people learn about podcasts. They share them, right? So at the end of your podcast, hey, make sure you share this podcast with friends. Just ask the audience to do that. That's how you build an audience on podcast. And a podcast audience, this does not happen overnight, okay? It takes years to build an audience. And you have to be consistent in your episodes. So I always say, we do several podcasts as a part of our radio ministry. So we do a podcast. Okay, this is a weekly podcast, and it launches on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock in the morning. So every Tuesday at 6 o'clock in the morning, a new episode comes out. We can't miss episodes. So if you want to miss episodes, then I suggest you set your podcast up in seasons. So season 1, you can do 10 episodes, right? Take a break, take a couple months off, and then come back with season 2. Season 2 could be 10 episodes, could be 12 episodes, right? There's flexibility there, that way. But there are consistent podcasts that have been going on for 15 years that have a larger audience because they've been consistent and they've grown that audience. It's not like, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to have 1 million listeners by next week. How are you going to do that? Unless you pay millions of dollars to put television commercials and radio commercials in traditional media and social media ads and promote that podcast, you're still not going to get 1 million listeners. But you're spreading the word about it using marketing.
Thank you so much for that. Quite insightful, I must say, because from that, I'm going home with the fact that, one, you have to be relatable as possible with your audience.
Yes.
And secondly, you have to incentivize your audience to share your work over and over in a consistent pattern.
Yeah.
And just from that, maybe our audience who are live here on us, on air with us, they can tell us, they can ask whatever question they have concerning these aspects of radio and content and podcast management. Maybe we can just pass the mic along to them, and they can tell us if they have a question from that side. Yes? Yeah.
My name is Lucy. I am really enjoying the podcast. My question is, being a Christian-based radio, how do you choose the advertisements that you pick to run in your radio stations, and what criteria do you use to sort out the advertisements and the companies based on morals and principles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our sales team is the one who sells advertisement for our radio station, but also our podcasts. And our sales team, when they communicate with businesses, the businesses know who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. So they know that we're faith-based, okay? We're not going to approach a business that does not align with the same values that we hold as followers of Jesus. So we're approaching businesses, we're looking at businesses that are neutral, that's not going to be offensive. Even people that have reached out to us that are doing a ministry that is, so like counseling women who have had an abortion, okay? I have to protect my audience, and that includes my target audience's children. So if we put the commercial on the air, which I'm sure that we have listened, so a third of our audience did not go to church. A third of our audience are Christian, a third of our audience are from the Catholic faith, and a third are unchurched. So these, we have to protect the audience, and so I don't want to necessarily put, even though I believe in that, and what they're doing, I don't want the listener, mom, to have to explain to her kids, what are they talking about on the radio, mom? Right? So we have to protect our audience. So we looked for businesses that are like-minded in their product and their values. Not all of our business owners are Christians, okay? They just want to reach the Christian audience, and their product is a service that works for our Christian audience. So having the sales team understand that, and the sales team communicating that as they visit with potential clients, that's how you work that.
Wow. Generally from that, I actually got something, and I feel like I'll also integrate it into our podcast here in school. Now, we have other questions, of course, following, and I think we have barely even scratched the surface on this. But we'll just ask our audience to bear with us and have a 5-minute break. And right after the break, we'll be looking into now the specific market of content creation and programming and podcasting as well. So, audience who are with us, don't leave us. 5 minutes time, we'll be back. Thank you.